Welcome, everyone, as I cough, to the Customer Success Leadership Roundtable. I'm Andrew Marks, co-founder of Success Hacker and our Success Coaching Training Program. We are back for our monthly live webcast today talking about data-driven decision-making. This free learning event is brought to you by Success Coaching, the world leader in customer success professional development training, with now more than 19,000 students from 92 countries. Our programs are available in a variety of formats, from self-paced online learning to virtual instructor-led boot camps. We're accepting registrations for all of our virtual instructor-led programs through the end of the year. We still have a few seats left for both our level 1 and level 2 boot camps that are happening in November, taught by my partner Aaron and myself, and our change management for customer success and outcome-based selling boot camps in December. We will also be posting our 2023 training schedule on our website, I believe, Ashley, sometime in the next few weeks, including our spring coaching programs being offered in partnership with the University of San Francisco. Find out more at successcoaching.co. Ashley will also drop a link in the chat. For those of you that haven't participated in one of these events before, this is a live and unscripted discussion where we dig into a single topic relevant to customer success, regardless of the company that you work for, the scope of your role, or the sizes of the customers that your teams deal with. We aim to pick topics that are going to be practical and useful to you. The schedule for our upcoming events can also be found at successcoaching.co. Click on the events tab at the top of the page to find out more. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar is recorded and we'll be posting a replay along with the transcription on our website. I was waiting for that. Early next week. Thank you, Ashley. We will be taking questions later on during the webinar, so please don't be shy and use the Q&A button of your at the bottom of your screen to ask or upvote a question. And we're also broadcasting on LinkedIn Live and have somebody monitoring that feed. Thank you, Tracy. So if you have questions watching on LinkedIn, please post them and they'll be relayed to us. Also, please keep all commentary to the chat window. Now, there's a lot of thought leadership out there, along with a lot of theories about how to deliver customer success. And in this series, we focus on practical, real-world advice, best practices, techniques, and shared experiences from those working with or leading customer success teams on a daily basis. And to do that, we invite 3 panelists. Unfortunately, one is unable to make it today, to join me for a roundtable discussion. These are people who are great at their craft, and we ask them to share their experiences and their perspectives. So without further ado, I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves to y'all, talk a bit about who they are and what they do, and let's get started as usual in alphabetical order with Ed.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello, everybody. Ed Powers. I am a consultant in the world of customer success, and I've been involved in customer success for about 10 years. I have also held vice president of customer success roles, stood up new teams, turned around some struggling teams as well, and done work at the enterprise level for churn reduction and growing the installed base. So these days I've been doing consulting. I work with probably 30 different companies, from startups to multi-billion-dollar companies that are adding this funny thing called a subscription model. So everything in between. And full disclosure, I work with Andrew and his team. I teach a course called Data-Driven Decision Making for Customer Success.
Yeah, I was going to mention that if you hadn't mentioned it. So that's awesome. Thanks, Ed. Thanks for making the time. Appreciate it. I know you're busy. Marta, you're up.
I'm up. Hi, everyone. Lovely to see you all today. I'm Marta Montero. I am currently the head of customer success for North America at a company called Gatekeeper. We're a SaaS-based contract lifecycle management and third-party risk management solution. I've been in customer success for just around 10 years now. I've been leading teams for just under 4 years. Customer success is a huge passion of mine. So is data. So this is marrying of all my favorite things in today's discussion.
Awesome. And yeah, Marta, congrats on the new role. Last time we spoke, you hadn't moved over there yet. So that's awesome. Good for you.
Thank you. Yeah. 2 months in.
Yeah. Awesome. Great. So The fire hose has started.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
From the first day, it's been
Yeah.
drinking from a fire hose,
You're
but
drinking from the fire
in the
hose.
best
Okay.
way possible.
Awesome. Thanks, Marta. And we'd also like to send our best to Tom Petito, who was involved in a rough biking accident last week and is unable to make our call today, but he is on the mend. So, Tom, a speedy recovery to you. Once again, we all appreciate your time today. Now let's get to the topic at hand. A company makes many critical choices over the course of its existence, but unfortunately, too many organizations make decisions based on inaccurate facts or worse, complete fiction. It's never good business to do it by shooting from the hip. Guesswork is generally not rewarded in business. You might get lucky and get it right sometimes, but you're more likely to get things wrong more often than not. But that's what we're here today to talk about. So to get us started out of the gate, who wants to take a stab at defining data-driven decision making?
I am happy to take the first stab, and Ed and Andrew, feel free to agree or disagree with what I'm saying here. But I think, Andrew, you hit the nail on the head. Guesswork is not well rewarded in business. And ultimately, being data-driven from a business perspective is an approach, an objective approach, where you take a number of different stimuli that's available to you, different levers that are available to you, and take a look and see what the paths forward are. I think a common pitfall in this idea of being data-driven is thinking that there's a single path, or that the data is just going to magically explain just the one way to do things. And another common pitfall is the opposite. It's actually falling into analysis paralysis. There are so many different things that you can do that you might freeze up and not be able to take a decision, and both take away from your ability to be data-driven.
Now, how do we avoid analysis paralysis?
That's a great question, and genuinely one I struggle with quite often myself, because I feel strongly that there's so many different things to do. I believe intuition and experience is a big part of avoiding analysis paralysis. And that comes from being parts of conversations such as this, learning from people who are experts, taking the guidance of what other people are doing and best practices, and trying that. The other piece that has been really helpful for me is continuous improvement. So as a natural perfectionist, it's easy for me to get stuck in analysis paralysis because I'm trying to do the best thing possible. Instead, a great approach that has worked for me is saying, I just need to make the next step, and from there I'll take the next step, and from there I'll take the next step, and that's going to take me to that's going to provide me with failures, and it's going to provide me with successes, and those are the learnings that I then build on.
And Ed, you're working with a bunch of companies that are trying to get into customer success, figure out what customer success is, evolve their customer success. How do you ever experience that type of situation where they fall into that analysis paralysis trap, and they're just afraid of moving forward, or they feel like they don't have all the information, or they're just afraid of trying things?
Yeah, my personal experience, and I think, the other thing I do as well is I'm really fascinated by how the brain works and how people make decisions. And, we were talking before the call, Marta, about Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink. And we are actually hardwired to jump to conclusions. So if there's one thing that I see happening a lot is that people will jump at something without thinking it through. And that is, to me, more common. Sometimes you will see analysis paralysis, and it's completely understandable, but I actually see more often the other side of it, is that people will see a problem and they assume they know the answer and they jump at it with all the best of intentions. They spend a lot of time and effort to try to go fix something. And then at the end of the day, nothing really changes because they treated a symptom and not a root cause. And I think part of this is being data-driven is to expect that the truth is hidden from you, that your first impression is usually not the right one. Just like when we hear in the news, so-and-so was arrested for a crime. Well, we automatically assume, well, clearly they're guilty, right? And then you hear the authorities, they say, well, this is an investigation, this is a person of interest, and they will have their day in court, and let's not jump to conclusions, right? But our first impression is you hear something and you immediately believe it and you jump at it. And part of being data-driven is using the other part of your brain where you say, well, let's slow down a minute, let's think this through, and let's engage our logical, rational half and try to understand what's really going on here.
Yeah, that's interesting. It just happened in the last 24, 48 hours. At the conclusion of the Raiders game the other night, there was a video shot of Devontae Adams, who was the wide receiver who had just screwed up a play that could have, gotten the Raiders into a position to win the game. And he was walking back to the locker room, and the original story was he pushed a cameraman out of his way, and it was viewed as, oh, he's going to get fined, he's going to get malicious. Everybody's talking about, wonder how many games he's going to be suspended, what's going to be fined. Apparently there was another camera view that actually showed the guy basically stepping in front of him right as he was, and basically and he walked into him. Right. And everybody's like, oh, wait a minute. This is a different view. This is a different view of that situation. It wasn't, he was, lashing out at somebody. This guy basically jumped in front of him right as he was walking down the hallway towards the locker room. So, it's true. Our intuition can backfire on us.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And I have a little story to share on that. A lot of times we look at problems with a bias, with an expectation or a belief that may not be justified. I was working with a client just recently, and I believed, and the client believed, that there was a relationship between time to value and customer retention. And our belief was that the shorter the time to value, the greater the customer retention, right? That's intuitively obvious. People talk about that all the time.
People talk about it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. But lo and behold, as we looked at the data, we found that there was no relationship between those two things. And it surprised me, surprised them. And it was kind of a head scratcher. Now, there was a relationship between whether or not a customer got to value that was highly predictive of whether or not they would renew. But the time it took to get there mattered not at all. So had we not looked at the data and challenged that fundamental assumption, we would have made some really dumb decisions. We would have, I would have said, well, TikTok, let's get in there. Let's make sure that we move things along with the customer. And our working hypothesis is that, well, in their particular space and their particular business model, they have a combination of subscription and consumption. The subscription amount is nominal. It's not very expensive at all. The real cost comes in on the consumption side. And in their particular space, what they're buying will expand the revenue, but it's not like the primary driver to their revenue. So it's more of a nice to have than a must have. Mm-hmm. So people will buy this product with anticipating that they will get to it, but it's not always the number one thing on their list, right? So had we gone in there and been pushing them and say, TikTok, we got to get this done, customers would have said, we're on our own time. Don't worry, we'll call you we'll tell you when we're going to start doing this, right? So that avoided a whole bunch of things that would have made a worse customer experience because we had believed something that wasn't true. And once we looked at the data, it's like, that's interesting. That's counterintuitive, but that's what the truth is. So I think that's what data-driven decision-making really buys you at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think, Marta, there's there's a lot of talk out there in customer success. We have a very very collaborative community out there. I kind of cringe when people say things like, well, you got to have time to value of 90 days or less. Okay, well, that might be in your world what works for you, but it might not be relevant in somebody else's.
Oh, absolutely. I think one thing that there's a danger of creating, or rather perpetuating, especially when it comes to thought leadership, is this idea of an echo chamber of, I am going to take this and I'm going to apply it as the truth because someone else has said it. And then Andrew has said it and Ed has said it and they know what they're talking about. Therefore, it must be true. But you do need to take a step back. Intuition, I mentioned this earlier, best practices intuition, that is something that can help you, but it's a double-edged sword when it is the only thing that you believe and you make every decision off of that in spite of what is in front of you. And so you need to take that, as you did, Ed, in the great example you just shared. This is typically what you hear. This is typically what happens, but let's take a look and let's see what the data is saying and make our own conclusion off of that and build a strategy off of what the data is saying and not what best practices are. There's a comment right now in the chat that I really like, is every customer's journey is their own. And I think that that's a great piece of advice to bring into when you are building out strategy. All of this, everything that all of the thought leaders say and your experience has shown in the past is helpful, but it is not the end all be all. And you need to question that. Absolutely.
Yeah, the old, it depends.
It depends.
Yeah. And when I respond to things on especially on LinkedIn, to things that get posted on there, I usually put that caveat in. It depends. How do I do X, Y, and Z? Well, you need to consider this and this and this and this. There's lots of different things that you need to consider. So what are some of the advantages of data-driven decision making? Let's talk through those. What are some of the advantages besides, making better decisions? What jumps out at you?
I think Marta had brought this one up before, as continuous improvement. I think it's that notion of you can either treat a symptom or you can treat a root cause. And how do you get to that? Well, you need to peel the onion. You need to really look at what that is. And typically when you're addressing the root cause, the solutions that you put in place are much more dramatic in their effect and they're much more sustainable, right? So if you're going to invest the time and the effort to go solve a problem, why not go get some data and validate and make sure that you're solving the right problem?
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. I think to what you were saying earlier, Ed, that there's a natural bias towards jumping to a conclusion. Spending the most amount of time trying to figure out what the problem is and defining the problem is what's going to get you to the right answers, because again, I don't think there's ever a single answer. It depends, as we've just been saying. And being data-driven allows you to sit with that questioning and allows you to go through and validate that you are dealing with the root cause and not the symptom. If this was the medical world, for example, and we go to our doctor and we go, hey, I have a headache, and they just give you some aspirin and send you off on your way, and you come back the next day and you still have a headache and it continues. And it turns out that, I don't know, maybe you've got migraines or something entirely different. That would be considered malpractice in a doctor's world, because you haven't solved the actual problem. You've solved the symptom only. And so it's really important. This approach allows you to dig into what is actually causing the behavior and not what is causing the appearance of certain things.
Yeah, root cause analysis. Right. which is ultimately what we want to do. I want to solve the problem so it stops rearing its ugly head and sapping a bunch of time and effort from us because we have to fix it each time.
Right.
What about just having that data to back up your contentions, right? So that being able to go and provide feedback to teams, to product, to sales, to marketing.
Yeah,
You know,
that's a really good one. Yeah, a lot of what some of the work that I do with clients is, asking why are customers leaving and why are others staying and buying more. And when you start asking the why question, even when you look at things like churn and you start to quantify that, right? We get some indications about what are the reasons that customers are giving us for the decisions that they make. Well, you can quantify that. You can Pareto that out and say, okay, X percent of this has to do with product. Y percent of it has to do with how we're selling it. This other percentage has to do with how we're delivering it. This other percentage is something that, customer success can do something about, right? And when you actually look at the numbers and the causes, to your point, you go back to your CEO and you say, you want to solve the churn problem? We're happy to work on this little piece over here as customer success. But let's talk about these other high Pareto items. Let's talk about what we need to change in terms of our product or our service. That's where the really big impacts are made, is typically right there. And you have to have evidence to make your claim, to show that case.
Right. That's also, data-driven voice of the customer.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Our customers are saying X, Y, and Z. These are our customers, or this cohort of our customers. 40% of our customers are asking for this functionality. This isn't me from customer success coming to you and saying, I feel like we should do X, Y, and Z. It's, hey, this is the narrative that I'm laying out for you. And it's based on 40% of our customers are saying we need this. That carries a lot more weight than just saying, hey, product, we need this function.
Mm-hmm. And I think you can take it a step further and say, if we do this, these are the problems we're helping our customers solve in their own businesses. And without having that last piece, as a CSM or as a CS function, we really should be understanding our customers' businesses in and out. And so us digging into that information helps us make that bigger case to our product team, to our leadership team, also to our customers, because we can then turn that back around and say, hey, we worked with you on this, and that. This is the effect it had on your business. What does this mean for a relationship? Or, it allows you to take that next step because you've provided value in a way that that's a lot richer than just, we're doing this because you like it or you've asked for it.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it all sounds like rainbows and unicorns, but there are challenges in data-driven decision making. What are some of the challenges that you all have faced in making decisions based on data?
Well, one is I'm sure everybody on this call will agree. There was a study. Dayanami did this back in June. They did some study of like 500 different companies, and they came back and said that only 11% of the people who responded to that said that they don't have data quality issues, right? So data quality, data hygiene, garbage in, garbage out. And we all suffer that every day, So that is one of the big challenges, is making sure that you have good, reliable, understandable, consistent, complete, full, accurate data.
I'm glad that one of you brought that up right out of the gate, because it's having come from the analytics and BI world, it was a constant struggle that we were dealing with, just crappy data. What else?
I mean, well, I was going to keep going on Ed's point.
Yeah. Go
the
on.
words right off right out of my mouth.
Yeah.
That's where you can have false conclusions as well if you don't have the proper data. It is very easy. Ed, going back to your example on churn analysis, if you're only capturing the churn reasons for 1/5 of the customers leaving, it is very easy to make a conclusion or an assumption on trying to extrapolate that information to the rest. But that is not enough data to say this is what's happening at a bigger picture, and this is the ongoing pattern. This is also where longitudinal studies come in really effectively, because you can see the pattern over time. So it's not just the quality of the data, it's also the length of the data, the amount of the data.
You have data in different formats, right?
Yeah.
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 And there's a learning curve for interpreting the data. And then there's data that you don't have that you didn't know you needed, right? We don't know what we don't know.
Right. Yeah, and there's a bias among data scientists. This is one of their biggest, blind spots, is that we tend to assume that we have all the data we need to make whatever decision we need, right? And the problem with that, that's a bias called "what you see is all there is," or WYSIATI. So we tend to believe whatever is easy for us to recall is all there is that we need to know. And the problem is that if we don't go ask the questions and start with our hypothesis, what do we believe to be the case, and then turn around and look at what data we have, then we won't identify areas where we don't have the data that we need, right? So we need to start with what do we think is the case here? What's our hypothesis? Then we go design the experiment, go get the data and find out, is that right or is that wrong?
And space is cheap these days, so there's no reason why you shouldn't be collecting everything. And one of the first things we did when we rolled out our training program is we built a data warehouse, and we capture everything that we can. Because at some point we figure we're going to need, there's stuff that we don't know that we need to know.
Well, let me challenge that a little bit, Andrew, if I could.
Okay, challenge you. Yeah.
Because yes, it's cheap to store, but it's not cheap to collect or maintain or clean. That's where the cost comes in. And we tend to, especially if we're relying on humans to type things in, right? That time is money. What is interesting, and that is a place to start for sure. But as companies mature and they get more data driven and they start asking these questions, they pretty quickly realize that we're taking 138 different data points. There's 4 that really matter. And we don't need the other 134 of those, right? And very quickly, you can reduce the amount of burden that you put on your people, the amount of time and expense you have, by getting to something that is much more predictive, right?
Fair, but there are 4 that are important right now. Maybe there are another 20 that are important later on.
Could be.
And I agree that, when you're talking about, we don't want people to be doing busy work just for doing busy work. Mm-hmm. Now, in our case, we're capturing data from a bunch of systems. It's all automated, it's ETL'd, right? So it's extracted, it's transformed, it's loaded, it's cleaned, and there's some cleanliness going into it in our case. So once again, it depends. But I would rather err on having too much data than not enough data, because once again, 4 data points may be relevant now, but there may be 20 that are relevant later. And what happens if I don't have those other 20?
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes I've been in situations where, we've done a data dump, and I've said to, I myself have loaded it into an Excel spreadsheet and threw up a pivot table and sat there and tried to figure out what kind of patterns can I come up with from this. Oh, let's look at country. Let's look at the space this person is in. Let's look at the courses that they've signed up for and completed. And there's all sorts of different ways to slice and dice the data. And there's things that you will begin to learn about your customer and your product and your usage by just sitting there and playing with the data. But if you don't have a full data set, you may be missing some things.
Well, and let me throw one thing on that too, Andrew. Data visualization is not the same thing as data analysis. right? It's very easy with the tools that we have today, whether it's Tableau or Looker or Power BI or what have you. You can take any data and graphically represent that, right?
Yep.
But the challenge is that most of what we see in the numbers is just noise. It's not signal. So
Agreed.
being able to understand, well, I'm seeing something, is that real, or am I just looking at random noise? And
Right.
being able to extract that and to say, oh, that is signal. This other thing over here is noise. This is meaningful. That's not meaningful. And being able to separate that using the tools is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, 100% agree on that. By the way, just a reminder, if you have questions, we'll start answering questions here in a few minutes, but please go ahead and use that. Where is it? There you go. The Q&A functionality. Well, at least on my screen, it was right there. That Q&A functionality at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions that you have. Marta, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that the little tiff that Ed and I had?
I'm curious. I mean, I feel like I'm a audience participant right now. So I'm curious, Ed, what your best practices are to decipher signal from noise.
Well, I hate to do some shameless promotion, but that's actually what my course goes into with success coaching.
It's almost like you paid me to do this.
Yeah, I know.
Nice setup.
It wasn't planned. It was not planned.
Yeah, I mean, there's classical statistics that help you go through and sort that out. I mean, that's law of large numbers, central limit theorem. There's some very well established tools that date back hundreds of years that we can use every day. And in customer success, we can solve 70, 80% of these problems just by using a fairly small set of statistical tools.
I love that answer, because I think, and there's a question in the Q&A around this, what are the tools that we use to analyze the data? And I think that there's a natural, people tend to like things that are new and exciting, such as AI and predictive analytics. But I genuinely find myself, I still go back to Excel quite often. I still go back and throw up pivot tables. I still go back and do quite basic statistics that I learned in university long time ago. And those are still the tools that I rely on the most. I'll be honest, I personally myself, I haven't used a lot of predictive data models or AI where I have felt like, oh my gosh, this is the most incredible thing. I would not have been able to get an answer without having used this in the past. I think there's a lot of value in the gold standards of just simple, basic statistical analysis of the data without needing to go off and learn Python and run a full script and build out an entire algorithm to build out your data with, or to analyze your data with.
Exactly. Yeah. And you have to look at your circumstances. The difference between building out a predictive model using just multiple linear regression or logistic regression, things that are fairly common and are very accessible to folks, is the difference between maybe an 80% predictive accuracy or 85 versus maybe a 95% predictive accuracy using AI or machine learning. So what does that 10% more predictive accuracy really buy you? Well, if we're talking about a small number of accounts, not much. If you're talking about millions and millions of accounts, B2C, yeah, it's a lot. So it is one of those things you have to look at your circumstances and say, is my additional investment in data science, elaborate tools, data collection, cleaning, all these other things, is that going to buy me something that I can't get from off the shelf stuff? And I think back to our original conversation about people jumping to conclusions. Right now, there's a lot of hype about AI and machine learning, and of course, everybody needs to have it. Well, no, some very basic tools most of the time will cover what you need.
Yeah, the other thing that I've always shied away from predictive analytics and AI when it comes to a lot of the companies that we focus on, which are B2B, is that there's nothing that's 100%.
Mhm.
Right. And there are things, it's one thing if you are doing predictive analytics on a closed system, right, where the thresholds are very well defined and you can account for changes in the environment very quickly, very easily. For example, a company I founded many years ago built a analytics platform for high value assets, so oil rigs, right? And we created a predictive analytics engine that allowed you to predict when machinery was on the verge of failing based off of the sensor data that we captured. And we knew what the thresholds were for that sensor data because it was a closed system. And we knew to include variables such as environment when they were in the desert versus being in, the Pacific Northwest or in the ocean. And because it was a relatively closed system with very well-defined parameters, predictive analytics made a lot of sense. But in what we do traditionally, especially in B2B, there are things that are well outside of our control and our understanding. There's the human factor in everything. There's geopolitical events. There's the economy. There are things that aren't within that closed system that I think make that predictive notion harder to really be foolproof enough, to your point, Ed, to invest the money and the effort to get an extra 10% accurate.
Right. And
that makes sense.
The challenge I see is people have no idea how predictive things like their health scores are because they never even stop to quantify that. Right.
Yeah.
And even if you're doing it completely subjectively, you can measure that. You can see what that predictive accuracy is. And by adding even a little bit of discipline, a little bit of data along the way, you can increase your predictive accuracy without going hog wild on AI, right? So there are things that you can do to incrementally improve and to make that more predictive so that you don't have the watermelon problem, right?
Right, the watermelon.
Without
right.
having to be that elaborate or spend that much money. I mean, it is one of those things, is investment in return.
With that, at my previous organization, we had our renewals and churn. I had built out just a formula in Excel that was essentially just a number of if and statements. And every couple of months, I would add something new to it, check it out for the quarter, see if it changed, increased or decreased the accuracy at the end of the quarter, make adjustments, add it back in, etc. I never veered away from that Excel sheet to any of the CS platforms that we used. We had Looker as our organizational BI tool. I never moved it off of that because the accuracy I was getting from it, by the time I left, we were at around 90% to 92% accuracy in predicting churn. So it's all about really starting small and almost going back to what I said at the beginning, those continuous improvement and making changes. And a lot of the times you actually are going to overcomplicate the problem by trying to build in these things that are not going to give you the ROI that you think you're looking for. And simplicity is really where it's at.
Right.
I think what's even more important than any systems, tools, anything like that is to just understand your customers, right?
Completely
Why
agree.
do they stay? Why do they leave? Why do they buy more? Why do they buy less? Why do they use what they use? Forget about all the tools on the predictive analytics and platforms and blah, 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 blah. Figure that out. There's your number one strategy, right?
Yeah.
Go and ask, go and do surveys, whatever assessments, whatever way that you feel is appropriate for your particular business to capture that information, right? But understand your customer.
Right. And breakthroughs come, whether it's, scientific breakthroughs, is asking that simple question, why? Yeah. People don't ask that nearly enough. Why is this happening? How do we know what we know?
So that's the why. the why. So it looks like I pretty much, I guess, answered Laron's, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, Laron's question there. What are some tools that you all utilize to analyze the data? What are some methodologies for slicing and dicing the data? Maybe use predictive models or AI. Okay, so we got that. Anything else before we jump to more questions? Anything else that either of you have to say about data-driven decision making? Maybe sources of data, or actually we kind of talked about that. How about how big of a data-driven decision making team do you think is necessary? Oh, good. I did get the pronunciation right. Good. Thank you. Always like to make sure I'm pronouncing people correctly. Marta, you got something?
I do. The biggest thing for me is curiosity. And I think if you have a curious team, you have a data-driven team. And I really think that curiosity is the most important soft skill that I personally hire for as a CSM, whether it's individual contributors or at a management level. It's really important to make sure that you aren't satisfied with what is in front of you and you're constantly digging in. So when I think about the size of a data-driven team, for me, everyone needs to be data-driven. Everyone needs to be curious and everyone needs to want to know more. And that is how you build a strong and effective and business transforming team.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, Marta. I think that's terrific. I was going to say intellectual humility, which is knowing that is not to leap to conclusions, to slow down, to say, sometimes things are not as they appear, and we need to be careful. And I think that goes to the leader. If the leader understands, let's take a look at this. What are the facts? What do we know? What do we don't know? And how do we know what we know? Those are the kinds of things, as opposed to saying, well, I have all the answers, just ask me and I'll tell you what the answer is, right? So I think that it comes to culture, it comes to humility. We talked about emotional intelligence. Part of emotional intelligence is saying, I don't know, let's go find out, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's wonderful to model. I think in terms of a practical standpoint, I think as customer success teams go and mature and as they start to get larger and larger, there is that need for specialization. When you start seeing a customer success operations team, a CS ops starting to go, that's where you probably want to localize some specialization in data analysis, right? You do, like you say, some people really like this, some people aren't really wired for it. That's fine. We all have our strengths. We all have our opportunities. So if there is a person who really loves that and they have the context really well, they know what this motion is and how customers behave, combining that subject matter expertise with some really good analytical skills, you get a lot of insights.
Yeah, I think ops, people in ops roles need to be need to have a proclivity to be data driven. When we were doing recruiting early on, in the evolution of the business, PS ops was, a customer success ops was really at its beginning, and we did a couple of searches for that, and time again I convinced my customers that we needed to find people that were data driven, that had at least some understood what a pivot table was in Excel, that sort of thing. So definitely, when you see, I would think the first hire into a customer success ops role, you need to go with somebody that's got that type of experience. They don't necessarily need to be a data scientist. And by the way, if you have a company where you have data scientists on staff, they're great people to tap into as well to help you.
Right. And to Marta's point, curiosity is that people are naturally question and want to find out, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think you said it best on Monday, Ed, when we were talking during the pre-call. You need to be open to your own ignorance, right? You need to be okay with that, right? On the surface, we don't know what we don't know until we look at all the data. All right, let's answer some more questions here. Ashika. Hey, Ashika, thanks for the question. Ashika asks, being data-driven is somehow anti-intuitive. As it was mentioned, people like to jump to conclusions since it's also easier. How do you help teams or people in teams appreciate being data-driven?
That is a great question. Yeah, and I think we need to start from the assumption that we are much more inclined to rely on our system one, which is our emotional intuitive half, and less inclined to be using our system two, which is our logical rational half. And that's just because there's more effort in system two and it consumes more resources. So we naturally are just wired to be that way. And I think if we understand that about ourselves, then we can anticipate and expect that that's how people are going to react. And it's okay. When people say, well, I think it's this, you know, we had a saying back at HP many years ago in continuous improvement, you know, in God we trust, everybody else bring data. And when you start, you know, saying that, people say, okay, well, where's your data? Show me the evidence. Not that you know, that sounds like a great idea. Let's go find out.
Yeah, I first of all, I'm stealing that line. I think that's an incredible line. And I completely agree. I think, I mean, not to bring it back, but it goes back to curiosity and wanting to create also as a leader, it's important to create a psychologically safe space for people to be curious. I think part of the reason why some people are sometimes afraid to put more of that effort and think things through is there's some fear of failure. And there's this fear that, well, if I get a negative response to something, then I haven't learned anything. And I actually think it's quite the opposite. I don't think that success is a good teacher. I think failure is much better of a teacher. Everything I have learned is from falling on my face, and I am happy to fall on my face over and over again to learn those lessons again. And so I think it's important as a leader to create a team and a culture and a space where people will fall on their face, and it's okay. They want to fall on their face again because they've learned something from it.
Yeah.
I've learned more from my failures in my career than my successes.
Yeah, you hear that term growth mindset. That is what growth mindset is that it's okay. I'm not good at this yet. And the word yet. We need to get better at this. It's not that we're bad. We just need to get better. How do we get better?
And also, you know, just because you might, even though you might have one point of data, right? Maybe it makes sense for you to get additional points of data. I'm always one to say, okay, is that everything that we can get? Because you know, intuition can be dangerous, but also basing your decisions on a single point could be dangerous as well. I'm going through this situation right now in my homeowners association. I just joined the board, and we're talking about fire abatement, and everybody says, well, you know, CAL FIRE says 100-foot radius and you should be fine. Well, we have a very unique community, and CAL FIRE didn't come here and say, hey, it's 100-foot radius around your house. Because our community, we have 160 acres of open space behind, you know, most of the lots. That can create a firestorm. For me, I want to get somebody from Placer County Fire to come down here and take a look at our particular situation and give me one more data point and say, okay, yeah, 100 feet's going to be fine. If they come back and say, yeah, 100 feet's going to be fine, great. I suspect they're going to come back and say, actually, you have a freaking firestorm waiting to happen. You're going to need to do more fire abatement back here, right? But that type of thing, you can't, into going just on gut feel is not good. And if you have the chance to get more than one data point, but once again, we also, though, like Marta, you mentioned before, we don't want to get into analysis paralysis. So, Ashika, thank you for the question. Adil, thanks for the question. Adil asks, what would be your key 1 to 3 data points to identify growth in a customer's site that uses your SaaS tool?
So I'm going to go back to what we said earlier and say it depends, because it doesn't just depend on the company you work for, but it also depends customer to customer. For some people, using the tool in a specific way might mean that they're not getting value. For someone else, the exact same tool, using it the exact same way, that does mean value. So this one's a great question, but it becomes a very difficult question to answer in painting with broad strokes, because you don't want to fall into the fallacy that because something is important to me and this one customer, that it's important to someone else. So I would say ask what is important to your customer. Ask what they would see as the data points that prove that they're getting value out of using your SaaS tool, and really get to know your customer, and you'll start to see those patterns, but there's still going to be idiosyncrasies from customer to customer.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the idea of applying scientific method, right? What is the outcome that I'm looking for? What is that end result? Whether it's the customer getting value or them buying or retaining, start with that. What is the outcome? What's my why value?
Yeah.
Then what's your hypothesis? What do I believe is causing that? Right? Is it usage of certain features? Great, that's my hypothesis. Well, now let me take some data on those features and let me see if there's a relationship between what I'm observing here and what that outcome is that I'm interested in, right? Take the data, analyze the data, make a determination, learn something, move on, do another experiment. That is scientific method, right? And there's a reason why we've been doing it for 2,000 years, because it really, really works.
Yeah, because those common features may be great for this cohort of individuals, this cohort of customers, but for a different cohort of customers, they're not essential. So yeah, awesome, love that. So, and it depends, Adil. Sorry, can't get more specific than that. Let's see, Sean, welcome. Sean asks, how do you regroup? Sean. Yes, we know Sean.
We know Sean.
We know Sean. How do you regroup after you have presented the data and leadership or customers make an irrational decision? Oh, that's never happened to me before.
That's a good Sean question too.
Wow. Yeah.
I would say first I get annoyed. I have a conversation offline.
Yeah.
And get some of that annoyance out.
This is where you put it into an envelope and seal it and say, when I quit, I want you to open this. It again.
Yeah, that's the old, you could lead a horse to water. I mean, and it goes back to that, intellectual humility. If you're dealing with people who have a lot of hubris, good luck. You're not going to change them, right? I mean, you can present the evidence, speak your truth to power, and you're on the record for what it's worth.
Actually, can we change that to speaking your truth and just call it speaking the truth?
Yes.
Because the speaking your truth thing is I'm not a fan of, because truth comes from facts, from data. That is from truth, data. Yes. Right? And I actually worked for a guy whose last name should have been Hubris. I mean, he wouldn't listen to anything. He thought he was smarter than everybody else, and his company ended up getting fire sold for half of what the VCs put into it. It was like watching a slow moving train wreck into a dumpster fire. So I don't know how you regroup. I mean, just freaking write that decision down and just start taking notes every time, it comes to bite you. right?
Yeah,
So you can go back
it's
to them and say, I
painful.
told you so.
Yeah,
Right?
and you
Maybe
kind
you'll
of
listen to me next time.
you
Right?
kind of have to say the serenity prayer too. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
honestly, you
Totally.
honestly do. I mean, that's really what that boils down to. It's just to recognize, is this organization going to do the right things and move ahead? And if it's not, you can't change people.
I actually, at that company, I had it was so frustrating. I don't know where it is, but I had one of those little bozo dolls, the ones that you punch when you're a little kid. They had the big ones you buy for your room.
And they go like
and
this.
they
Yeah,
go
they-
back like
Peter
that. Yeah.
Potter.
So I had one on my desk. And so I would come back from a meeting with my CEO and I'd end up punching it off the desk. That's how I dealt with that. That's how I'd regroup. So, sorry, Sean. We don't have a good answer for you. It's frustrating, just take copious notes. And if it comes back to bite the company, at least you know that you actually presented the right data. You presented them with an opportunity to make the right decision, and they didn't make the right decision. So
Yeah, and sleep well with that.
yeah, exactly. Ed, welcome. Ed lives close to me here in Roseville. Ed, can you expand on how SaaS companies are defining metrics on first value?
Yeah, this is something, and we talk about this in your course, Andrew, is customer success planning, right? So part of this is understanding, having a very candid discussion in the very beginning. What does success look like to you? Help me understand that, right? And sometimes customers will say, I'm looking to get this outcome. And this is how I measure it. A lot of times they don't. But then sometimes you have to go in there and say, well, we work with a lot of customers just like you, and this is what they do, and this is what we recommend. How does that sound to you, right? So you can kind of lead them towards adopting a metric that they will buy. That really would be a good indicator. Let's use that, right? So with that, that first value, once you understand what that is, then that time, it would be from here to that point. You can say, we want to get you here by this time. Does that look good? Oh, by the way, this is what the trajectory looks like with our other customers. This is what good looks like. If you're off here and you're not trending the right way, we need to talk about that. There's probably some corrective action we need to do. So I think it all goes back to your customers, your market segment, your experience, and being able to present some metrics that either from experience are good ones to really demonstrate that. Or if the customer says that's all good, but this is how I'm measuring it, let me write that down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, at the end of the day, though, you need to quantify success, and you need to be kind of modeling your success plan towards the achievement of that success, assuming that quantification of success is reasonable, is realistic. But more times than not, when you walk in, and far more times than not, I would say probably 90% of the time, you walk in and say, okay, how do we quantify success? They're going to look at you like a deer in headlights.
Exactly.
What does that mean?
Be able to help them.
Well, guess what? You've done this for a ton of your other customers. A ton of your other customers, you've been able to, or hopefully you've been able to quantify success. You should know what a quantification of success is. It's your product. And there's only so many ways in which your product can be used. Even a bespoke solution like a business intelligence platform, you can come up with some standard sets of quantifying success. And you're not telling them how they should quantify success, but as you mentioned, Ed, you're leading them down the path. Here are some ideas. Here's some thoughts. Do any of these ring true to you? And you have to do that. The alternative is having instead of an objective target, hey, we've achieved what we're trying to achieve, you have a subjective target, and that becomes a problem. Well,
even sometimes people will say, back of the envelope, it's costing me 6 hours a week. This is my estimate. Come back and say, well, how much time does it take? Oh man, it's 20 minutes. Whatever is meaningful and salient to them is really what's important, because that's how they're measuring what that value
exactly. And then it's really easy to, talk about quantifying value. If you can get it to a discussion about hours. How many hours am I saving you? Well, that's 5 hours a week, and there are 100 of you. That's 500 hours a week times, you're able to very quickly say, Okay, you're giving me grief for a $50,000 renewal, and we're saving you $500,000 a year.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have to remind them of that too.
Yeah, constantly.
Constantly.
Marta, anything to add to that?
No, I think you have both hit the nail on the head there.
By the way, for those still around, still on, we do go until 15 minutes past the hour. So thanks for sticking around. We'll continue answering questions as long as we get questions, and as long as we have time. Bayron, hopefully I answered, or I pronounced that correctly for you. Bayron, can we use data to engage with disengaged customers? If so, how?
Love this one. Yeah, there's this is really handy if you've done a really good job of customer success planning and you know what's important to the customer and you start tracking that. What's really valuable and gets people's interest is when you show them how they're doing against the Joneses, right? Here's, are you on, are you off? This is what really good looks like. Here's where you stack up, right? That causes people to pay attention. They get interested. Wait a minute, is there more I can do here? I had no idea. I thought I was doing well. Looks like there's an opportunity for improvement here. So data can be used for that.
Benchmarks, people perk up when they hear benchmark.
That's right. And that is exactly right. And there's some fascinating studies that show, in our utility companies, right? They'll send you on the bill. They'll show you a little graph and they say, this is how, this is your consumption compared to your neighbors. This is what good looks like. Well, just by doing that, there's some studies that have shown that reduces consumption by like 2 or 3%. And that doesn't sound like much, but just showing people what that is, becoming aware of how they're using energy, you multiply that 2 or 3% by millions of customers, that's a lot of energy that gets saved, right? So little cognitive nudges like that really do make a difference. And yeah, absolutely, showing how I'm doing versus, best in class or against average, I'm all ears for that. Tell me more about that.
I think there's also that works exceptionally well in very high touch versions of customer success. And one of the things we haven't spoken too much about today is more of the tech touch or the lower touch and scaled or operationalized customer success. And this is where sort of dividing customers into cohorts based on, you might not have the luxury of being able to have a very in-depth success plan. A kickoff might not even happen. It might just be fully automated. And so taking that same approach, but applying it to the way that other customers use or don't use the platform, and then sending out drip campaigns with, hey, we noticed you haven't used this yet. Typically, at this point in the onboarding cycle, here's what some of our customers do. Here are the milestones that they hit. So doing that in a scaled way is also really quite effective.
Great point.
Awesome. Bayron, thank you for the question. Miguelina, what proportion of quantitative versus qualitative data do you collect and analyze?
Love that. And you need both. You absolutely need both, because the quantitative will tell you the what and the when. It doesn't tell you the why, and going after, qualitative, going out and actually talking to customers and getting that context. It's sometimes better to go to a smaller set and go deep than go to a wide set and go narrow, right? And when you start to make those connections, now your data starts to make more sense. One example, I was working with a client a little while ago. And, they brought me in because they said, we don't understand what's happening in our data. Our churn is really high. Help us analyze the data. Well, I was able to go through and find a few things that they hadn't seen before, which was great. But we got to a point where I said, we don't know the root cause here, right? The data is not going to show us that. We have to go talk to your customers, because some things we're not going to get it from the data that you have. We have to go analyze that. And what we found by going out and talking to maybe 20 different customers was that these were distinct They were thinking about their customer set as homogeneous. A customer is a customer is a customer. And they completely missed the fact that they had distinctly different segments with distinctly different needs and expectations of value. And their churn rate was high because they had this segment here where it was a really good fit, and this other segment over here that was a really terrible fit. Well, guess what happened? Half of their churn was this other segment, right? So unless you kind of get at the why and you really start to get the qualitative, your quantitative won't make any sense, right? So you have to do both. And I don't know if there's an ideal for that, but you absolutely do need to do both, because you have to put context around your numbers.
Anything to add, Marta, or is just violent agreement with that?
Just complete violent agreement with with everything.
That's what you get when you have Ed on these things.
I know. We need someone less well informed, Andrew.
Yeah, I know. He just knows his shit so well. So awesome. Miguelina asks again, how do you convince leaders that inherently believe data analysis equals time we don't have?
Yeah.
i.e., we need to act fast.
Yeah, that's that bias to action. We're going to work on our intuition. We're going to go, activity
Fail
means
fast.
productivity. Yeah.
Fail fast.
So yeah, we're not going to analyze. This is one of those things of, sometimes you got to go slow to go fast. There are some really interesting studies. I think the Project Management Institute did something like that, where they talked about the number one reason why projects are late. It's because of scope creep, right? And it's because, you don't take the time to really get the requirements nailed before you start doing the project, right? So what they've shown in their data over many, many years is that take the time, even though this may take a little bit more time up front, it's going to save you a tremendous amount of time down the stretch, right? So there are some really compelling studies that if people are really struggling with that, hey, don't take it from me. This is what this means. A little bit of time investment here, a little bit more than what we would normally do, is going to shorten the overall process of bringing this product to market or solving this problem. And once they kind of make that association, then I think it's a little easier sell.
And to be fair, it's very likely that whoever this leader is, they've probably been burned by that bias to action in the past. And so show them the consequence, or remind them the consequences of having acted on gut instinct and shooting from the hip, and go through what the alternatives could have been. And I just keep showing them the pain of acting in that manner.
Yeah. Makes sense. All right. And last but not least, it looks like, unless anybody else wants to jump in here, Natasha, I hope I pronounced that right, Natasha. How do you use data to determine agent productivity in a contact center? God,
Yeah.
I rolled out contact center solutions for years. I mean, one of the ones that we looked at pretty extensively was fix on first visit, talk time versus wrap time, number of calls in a given period. If you have some sort of post agent customer satisfaction survey, include that. I think you got to combine all those things together. So just getting through things quick doesn't necessarily mean they're being productive, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be good productivity versus bad productivity.
Right. Yeah. And productivity is one of those things it's work output divided by hours work. So that tends to go to handle time, right? Total handle time.
Yep.
And if you can optimize that, generally you reduce your cost as well. But to your point, going fast, I spent a couple of years in an outsourced contact center, and we had clients that said, we're only paying for 4 minutes, right? And you get to 4 minutes, regardless of where it is, you had to hang up on the customer because that's all the client wanted to pay for, which is ridiculous, right?
Absolutely ridiculous.
And from a customer perspective, You look at Zappos. Zappos kind of redefined what customer service is all about. Wonderful book by Tony Say. Tragic end to him personally,
Yeah,
but
totally
Yeah.
tragic.
but I mean, this whole notion of first contact resolution is that we will not quit until we solve that problem. And what happened? They generated the most loyal following of anybody buying shoes online, right? So sometimes you got to break the rules. What does productivity really mean, and what are we trying to accomplish here?
Yeah, for sure. I remember one of my first jobs. I was running a pre-sales support team, and I had these statistics popping up. One of my support folks that were just crazy. This individual was highly productive, but we weren't taking into account fixed on first visit. We weren't taking into account customer satisfaction. The reason why this person was highly productive was because all we were measuring on was talk time plus wrap up time. And what this person was doing was, if there was a question that this individual could not answer and didn't use the tools that this individual had accessible to them, they would transfer the person back into the queue and have somebody else take care of it. And and after looking at, I'm sitting there looking at the data going, something's not right here. And expose that. I'm like, yeah, that's not you may be productive, but this is not what we need out of you.
Malicious compliance.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, we got one more. I'm sorry, Marta, do you want to add anything to that last question?
I mean, candidly, I don't have too much experience with that, but philosophically, I think it's important to look at leading versus lagging indicators. And I think that in the example you just shared, Andrew, it was a good example of where initially the focus was just on some of the lagging indicators, what has already happened. But once you dug in a little bit more and you discovered what was happening, you had a more holistic picture. So it's important to have both pieces of data that tell you what has happened and pieces of data that are a little bit more predictive and tell you what is happening to get a good picture of productivity or anything else.
Yeah, we didn't even get into the leading versus lagging indicators. That is super important, that whatever the anytime you can have a combination of the leading versus and the lagging is important, especially if you're trying to make decisions on, like, for example, customer journeys, customer paths. How's my customer doing? It's not the lagging indicators you should be focused on. It's the leading indicators, which are going to give you an opportunity if the customer goes off track to get them back on track and have an effect on the ultimate lagging indicator. Okay, even though we're over by a minute, one last question here for Adil. Objections about tracking users' activities can crop up when reaching out about specific data points. Is this common, and how do you overcome it?
So it's interesting where I work at now. We're very global, and we have a big presence in Europe, where GDPR is a huge part of that. I don't know that it's an answer for CS specifically to speak to. I think it goes beyond CS and more towards what a company's data policy is, and making sure that there's a lot of transparency with your customers on what that is. Ultimately, if and when this has ever come up in the past, we'll point to the data policy and we'll speak to what the value is and what is being recorded versus what isn't.
Yeah, I think that's the best you can do.
Yeah.
Ed, anything to add? Or are we good?
No, I think that's a great answer.
All right. Awesome. Well, we're at the end of our time for today. I think it was a great conversation, but it's not what I think, what all of you think. So please let us know by posting your feedback on LinkedIn and tagging either myself, our guests, or Success Coaching. I want to thank our guests for spending the time with us today and for the ideas, thoughts, insights, best practices that you shared. One final note, great CS leaders know they don't have all the answers, but they know where to get them. And that's why we created the CS Leadership Roundtable, to harness the knowledge and experience of the community to help improve everyone. We hope to see you again at our next event on November 9th, when we'll discuss developing and using customer health scores. By the way, some good data. We have some good discussions on data right there. Until then, make sure to make space for yourself and your mindset every single day, and have a great rest of your day, week, and month, everyone. Thank you.